Hello, everyone.
Hello, good morning. Is it morning? No, it's afternoon.
No, it's afternoon.
I don't even know what time
We are
it
in
is.
a Labor Day haze over here, so we don't know exactly what's going on anymore. But we do know it's one of our favorite Tuesdays of the month because Stacy Cross is here. Yay! And so soon after the last time, which is super awesome. Stacy, do you want to go ahead in case there's some people who don't know who you are? I will say you are our support specialist for the McDougall 12-day program, and this is a Q&A about Dr. McDougall's starch solution and variations thereof, which is why Stacy's here to be our expert guest.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be with you once again. My name is Stacy Cross, and I work as a support specialist for the McDougall 12-day program, and I do other things for the McDougall program. I run a weight loss discussion group. What else do I do? Oh, I do a bunch of other stuff.
You do a
Get
lot
us
of
ready
stuff.
for conferences. I help Heather with some stuff. Yeah, I do a lot of things, but mostly, and probably my favorite part, is getting to be a support specialist and getting to kind of be a subject matter expert at the starch solution and just the McDougall lifestyle, and really enjoy answering anybody's questions about all of that stuff. I just never get tired of it. I love it. I am also a mom of 4 boys and a wife, and I live in Texas. I'm also a registered nurse. And so I'm really looking forward to hanging out with you guys today and answering any questions you have. Please be sure to send them in so we can get to all of them.
Okay, we have a question now. Let me go back to the 2 cameras. So it's a very broad question.
Okay.
Soy. There's 3 question marks in the word soy. So I'm going to do what I usually do and translate the questions. And I think, how does soy fit into Dr. McDougall's way of eating, the starch solution, and maybe beyond?
Okay, that's a great question. So soy is made from soybeans. Soy products are made from soybeans. Soybeans are in the legumes family, and they are A-okay. They're whole plant foods, and we like them. I will say there are a lot of soy products that are derivatives of soy that are more like what I call frankenfoods, where you can take pretty much anything and turn it into something entirely different by adding enough chemicals, doing enough processing, and making it weird. Okay, so we do not want you eating soy-based frankenfoods. A good example would be when you're looking at an ingredients list, things that say soy protein isolate. Gosh, I forget what some of the other terms are, but minimally processed soy can be a healthy part of your diet. So when we're talking about minimally processed soy, we're talking about things like edamame beans. Of course, those are the whole soybeans, soy milk, tofu, tempeh. Ooh, is tempeh made of soy, Kathy?
Yes, traditionally it is, and you can get it made with other things now as well, like hemp seeds.
Right. So, right. With tofu, you can do that as well, right?
Yeah, especially the chickpea tofu. So some people are using it, making chickpea milk and making it, but also there's it's called shun tofu, S-H-U-N, which is made with chickpea flour. You and I have talked about that before, but that's different than the whole soy tofu that you were just mentioning. And one thing that could be kind of interesting, because this came up in a different group, the group I was complaining about earlier before I came on. Some people know what we're talking about, but someone kept going, tofu's not a whole food and neither is plant milk, because again, we talk a lot about not seeing the forest for the tree. No, you say something, you're in the weeds, but not seeing the forest for the trees. And one thing I want to mention too, that if you make your own plant milk, depending on what you're making it with, sometimes you may not have to strain anything out at all. If you're making soy milk, you will. And I actually take that okara and make things like 0 fat cream cheese or ricotta And, so I take that soy and just put a little bit of salt or salt substitute, a little bit of nutritional yeast, and it makes a really special date night dinner to have a little bit of that on top of your compliant, in case anyone is wondering, pasta. People are going, no, but because what I find sometimes, and I've found recently even more so, is that sometimes people, instead of going, oh, okay, so I'm making, and I know I'm talking specifically about ice cream, and we were talking about all the other foods, but like, I have some corn ice cream I'm eating right now. It's made with roasted fresh corn, sweet potatoes, and a couple of dates, and a little bit of soy milk.
I have.
And she has mango lime drink that just has like a little bit of soy milk in it, mango, a couple of dates. So instead of going, well, that sounds pretty okay to me, people are like, well, I don't think plant-based, if you remove anything, so it makes me wonder sometimes, the people who are like, oat groats are better than steel cut oats or rolled oats, and how are oat groats? Because something's removed from it. Obviously, it's the inedible husk. So in case anyone's wondering if I'm promoting us eating horse feed, I'm not. but it's like, even if I make some coleslaw in my food processor, that's been processed. So I think maybe even what I'm wanting to talk about with you right now, that I'm finally realizing, sorry, Stacy, is that
Okay.
maybe we should talk a little bit about minimally processed foods versus highly processed food. Like soy protein isolate is not something that I can make in my kitchen.
Right.
Okara is something I can make in my kitchen. Soy milk, tempeh, tofu, though you can buy all those things and that's fine too. You don't have to have the time to make everything to be able to be a whole food plant-based eater.
For sure. Definitely. Okay. So let me talk, as we launch into this conversation about processing. I do want to put a little plug for the 12-day program.
Yes.
And that is that this is one of those areas that we really help with at the 12-day program, because we're all out here in the world, in the wild, trying to figure out the best way to eat. And we're getting essentially what boils down to sound bites from lots of different directions. And the more credentialed the person is, or the more, more researched they are and all that stuff, maybe the more we trust them. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we're hearing things like, don't eat soy, don't eat processed things, don't eat whatever, and what it does is it removes all of the little ways that there really aren't a yes or no answer for a lot of things. And there's a gray, and there's lots of gray. It turns out that most is gray. Okay. And so, right now out there in the world, especially in the United States, there's this real big push. Hey, don't eat processed foods. Don't eat processed foods. But if you came through the 12-day McDougall program, what you would find out is that all processed foods are not created equal. Jeff Novick talks about that in the program, because what he explains essentially, and I won't spoil the whole thing for those of you who are signed up, but he essentially says, everything's processed. If you wash your apple before you cut it, that's processing. If you cut it with a knife, you're processing it. Everything you do to food is processing. And so then can we say, and I know people like blanket statements. I know I'm a recovering blanket statement lover. Okay. And now I'm actually on the other end of the spectrum, where I'm like, it depends about everything. But people love blanket statements. So they want a nice clean statement like, don't eat processed foods. Ooh, that makes me feel better, because that makes me feel in control, because I can do that. But it's not the case. It's just, there is so much nuance within what does it mean for something to be processed. So that's why we say minimally processed plant foods, okay? believe it or not, sometimes when you process a food, you actually make it a little better. And that's really tough for people to like wrap their minds around. The best example I can come up with here on the fly, I'm sure someone's going to argue with me in the comments. That's fine. Come at me. I'm always welcoming. And I certainly, honestly, if I'm wrong about things, I do want to know. So please feel free to correct me. But my understanding is things like cocoa or cacao, those are not heavily, but they are processed. They're certainly processed. The cocoa bean, has been processed and ground, and the fat has been mostly removed from it. And so then you get the cocoa powder or the cacao powder. Some might argue that what you end up with there is actually a better product to use, because you get all the benefits of the antioxidants of the cocoa bean and all of those things without the high saturated fat level of cacao beans and or cocoa beans. So that would be an example. Another example would be peanut butter powder. And I'm not saying you should run out and eat cocoa powder and peanut butter powder like it's going out of style, but I do feel better about you eating some peanut butter powder sometimes if you're making like a salad dressing or something like that, then I do saying, sure, go ahead and eat peanut butter and expect to lose weight, because you probably will run into some resistance if you're eating nut butters and trying to lose weight. It can be more challenging because they're very, very high in fat and calorie density. So anyway, minimally processed, and just kind of use your brain about it. You all have good judgment. And what Kathy just said is such a great point. If it's something that you couldn't just make in your blender or make at home, and it literally needs to be made in a lab with chemists, professional chemists, and chemicals and fire, and and you need one of those splashy eye sink things, like, might not be the best thing to eat on a regular basis. So you can trust, you can use your own judgment in these things. So did that help at all?
Oh yeah, that was awesome. Okay, and one thing I want to put up from Apple too is Apple said there's a difference between processed and refined, and I think maybe that's a good word to use. Refined food is, because I think for me processing is overused, because we obviously have a food processor, so we processed our slaw. And I try to use that because I think that maybe that can help people understand that everything done isn't so bad. And Apple's right, just what you're saying and I'm saying too, is besides, everyone needs to decide for themselves what fits, in their food space that they choose from. And I think what happens a lot of times is people get a little overzealous, and they're like, oh, I heard this, so I want to help you. And it's like, actually, I can even say this, I think. We shouldn't be telling people what to eat. We should be deciding what we want to eat. And I think, Stacy, you would agree, because I'm trying to think back, and I don't think there was ever a time in the year we were together you said, you shouldn't eat that. You've said to me, if your goal is this, you might consider lowering this. So that's a way to give information, instead of like, one time someone was in the comments was like, rolled oats are processed and no one should eat them. And I was like, I was interviewing a doctor, and I was like, oh, we have to stop for a minute. Okay, what we don't do in this community is tell other people what we can and can't eat. You can say, I choose not to eat rolled oats because I feel like they're over processed for my diet, right? And that's what's so great about the community here.
Yes, absolutely.
But I do think, and two things I really loved especially more. One was, I would have never thought to use the cocoa PB2 analogy, but it's actually quite good, because there may be times that you choose to, because I've heard someone say, oh, I'd never use PB2, it's too processed. And then I hear a lot of other people that say, I use PB2 because I really miss peanut butter and I can't have this other stuff. So that's where we get into what works for you, what's going on for you again. So I love that, and I'm gonna steal it, by the way.
Good. Please do. Yes.
And I just think it's just really interesting too, like going back to talking about washing an apple, cutting an apple, all of that is part of the processing. And unfortunately, I think highly processed foods, people just take off the highly and just kind of go with it. And there may be some cases that people can't have soy. Maybe you're allergic to it. Maybe there's something that goes on. And so I just love this. And what I find too is that with the McDougall program, I felt like I got to be educated and make my own better choices. And if I either on purpose made a bad choice or unconsciously made a bad choice, I never felt like what sometimes you feel out in the whole food plant-based Facebook space sometimes. Oh, how could you do that? Stacy is always like, oh, interesting. How did you feel about that, right? How did that work for you? So when you mentioned the 12-day program and that, I wanted to pull that out too, because I think sometimes the sound bites get mixed up with the actual doctor program message, which is very interesting too.
Yeah. And can I run one little thing into the conversation here, that I want to take an opportunity to just really honor Dr. McDougall and his approach, because if you haven't noticed already, one thing you can notice when you're looking at all the different doctors that are out there, all the different whole foods, plant-based, experts that are out there, there are a lot of people that want to give you a list. Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. Da, 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 da. And what I know for me personally, at the end of the day, once I felt like I had read everything and seen everything and all that, what I was left with was like an unbelievably high standard of how to obtain, prepare, and consume my food. And it was like, no salt, no sugar, no oil, no animal products, organic, this many greens, this many nuts, this many seeds, add in these spices that don't taste good, that make your food taste terrible, but it's good for you because it'll make you live long. And it was just constant and overwhelming. And the other thing was that I started to recognize that some of the foods that I was being advised to eat were not widely available at a reasonable price to everybody in the world. And I'm just going to take a minute. You guys know I'm very passionate about this aspect of things, which is, shouldn't it be true that the right diet for humans is one that is accessible to all? It shouldn't be just for rich people. It shouldn't be just for highly, highly, highly educated people. It should be accessible to all. And I love Dr. McDougall because he's the one who instilled that value in me. He, could he sit there and insist that every potato you consume is, free range, organic, non-GMO, born in the, the valley of the Himalayas, or you know what I mean? Like, he could have done that. And he didn't. He insisted that it didn't matter ultimately, like in the huge scheme of things, that whatever potato you could get your hand on is good enough, and just the way that he kept the message and the food so incredibly simple, and the way that he valued inexpensive foods and accessible foods as the staples, the mainstay of the diet, like rice and beans and corn and oats. And so when people, I'm just being honest, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings at all. Like, if this is you, first of all, you can always change your stance on it. But second, it's okay if you disagree with me. Totally great. It's totally fine. We can still discuss these things. But I am always bothered when people get on a chat or a discussion or whatever and say, you really should only be eating oat groats, organic oat groats, because everything else is processed and it's inferior. I'm like, Well, good for you that you have access to organic oat groats. But you know what? Guess who doesn't? Like lots of people. Lots of people. And even if they have access to them, they can't necessarily afford them. They're much more expensive in most cases. And so, who am I to say that even quick cook oats, instant oats, are not good enough? They are, by the way, they are good enough. And so are rolled oats, and so are steel cut oats, and so are oat groats. And Dr. McDougall is also very passionate. You know, if somebody asked him this question, which kind of oats should I be eating? He would answer and say, which ones do you enjoy?
I've heard him
That was
say
his
that.
answer. Because if you're enjoying the food, then that's what makes this lifestyle sustainable long term, which is what we're after. We're not after some sexy, diet where everything's pristine and clean and perfect for 6 months until you lose your mind and can't do it anymore. We're after lifelong lifestyle change that you can stick with.
Oh, this is so, this is so good. And also, I'm going to get back to some questions, but one thing, Els Gummer says, "Thank you so much for saying this, Stacy. I see you're channeling Dr. McDougall. We miss him so much." And then someone else says, Beth says, "I miss him so much, and at the same time, so grateful that you and others are here to continue reinforcing his message and making sure the message doesn't get adulterated from the way he intended it." And I think, and I know some people asked questions before then, but I also feel very passionate about, people have to eat. I've been poor before. I qualified for food stamps when I was in Louisiana. Right? So I've had it where now, obviously, a lot of food is accessible to me. And I can choose to support some of the farmers market farmers and things like that. But there was a time that the potatoes I got were the potatoes I could find on sale. And I think it's so important because I don't think it means to go this way, but I think sometimes as we're trying to improve and polish and do this and, and like this person can do this and I feel better because I'm maybe supporting an organic farmer. And that's great. It's still all these little polishing things, should you choose to do them, if you can afford to do them. Those are fine, but it's also fine to eat potatoes and beans like poor people have for centuries, right? I mean, almost all the really great, yummy bean and grain recipes come from country cooking and people who didn't have money for meat and things that we're consciously avoiding at this point. But at that point, we eat a lot of poor people's food.
Yeah.
And it's delicious.
It's delicious, and it is a joy. It is a joy to eat the food that comes from the earth. That is, it just so happens that it's the best thing for your body, and it's the best thing for the planet, and it's the best thing for the poor and the rich, and for the animals and everything. It's like almost like a little miracle, or you can call it whatever you want. It's, just the way that evolution has made things to be. You know what I mean? It's just whatever your thoughts on how we got to this point. It's a really beautiful thing. And I have a relative who a couple years back decided to eat this way because of me. Because they knew what I did for a living and all this stuff, and began asking me questions about it and everything like that. And I will never forget, they had been eating this way for a little while, and we were sitting down talking about it, and they were talking about how good they feel and how, their pants are getting looser and, people are noticing and they feel like their skin is better, all the things that we all get excited about. And then at the end of all the list of things that were better, they said, and I finally feel like I'm living in alignment with my values, and I didn't even know that I wasn't.
Right.
So beautiful.
It is. And Apple says, "Thank you, Stacy. This is fantastic." We're getting lots of good feedback and things like this. And you know what? Stacy and I didn't even talk about this. This is just me on my little bee in the bonnet kind of happening today. She's like, how'd you get so spicy today, right?
Love it.
Well, when you were talking about that, I always remember Dr. McDougall talking about the eating like kings, getting everybody in the situation that we're in today. It's because everybody's trying to eat like a king instead of eating like a pauper. So and
Yes.
it makes sense, you know. You look back at the pictures of the old kings and queens and stuff, and they all died very young, and they all were very large for that time period, and you know, so that really resonated with me when we had, you know, that talk during the 12-day
Yes.
program. The funny thing about all this conversation that went on about soy, let me try to get back up there to it, is Delia had asked that question about the soy, and it was a typo. She actually wanted to know, do you have any starch solution suggestions for taking care of a cold? Soy was a mistake.
That is hilarious. Okay? Because what a demonstration of how we will hop on the darn train and ride it all the way to the end. Like, not even meaning to. So, guys.
But it was
lots of
good. A great
translation.
conversation came out
It
of her
was,
typo.
yes. Okay. So the question actually, Delia, I'm sorry. I'm not sure that I got it, but let me make sure. Is when somebody has a cold, what should you be feeding them?
Yeah, she said, any starch solution suggestions for taking care of a cold?
Eat. Okay. So no. All right. Here's the deal. So if you were eating a regular standard American diet, the answer to that question would be you need to reduce your inflammation because, you know, the inflammation is probably exacerbating your mucus production, your cough, like all kinds of things. It's wreaking havoc in your system. But when you are eating the McDougall diet, where you're eating all whole, you know, minimally processed plant foods with starch at the center and all of that, you're already eating an incredibly low or no inflammatory diet. So I will tell you this, and Delia, I'm sure that you already have eliminated dairy from your diet, but I had no idea how problematic dairy was with mucus production specifically until I personally eliminated it from my diet. I get over colds so fast. And a part of the reason is because you just don't have that same mucus production. I'm sorry I keep using the M word, and I know it's really yucky, but and so the whole process happens much more quickly. So I would just say drink lots of water, eat what sounds good within the guidelines of the McDougall diet, and you'll do just fine. And make sure you're eating starch so you're getting the calories you need. The other thing is when you're sick, what do we all do? Somebody gets sick, we bring them food, we try to stuff them well, right? That is unnecessary. A lot of times we will lose our appetites when we're sick because our body is redirecting its energy towards fighting off what's going on. So this is just as important when you're sick that you really focus on eating only when you're hungry and stopping when you're comfortably full. So don't be afraid to not eat if you don't have an appetite, but do make sure you're drinking plenty of water.
And that reminds me, there used to be an old saying, I think, wasn't it something like feed a cold and starve a fever or something like that? So
That's
I think
so
a lot of people
funny.
get that in their head
Yes.
that they just like have to eat, right?
Yeah, that's so funny that you said that because that came to mind, but you guys know me and I always screw up these expressions and I was like, don't say it, Stacy, because you're going to mess it up and you're going to really confuse people. But yes, I remember being taught that, but ultimately even like the sage wisdom of, you know, our childhood that we think like, oh, let's do the brat diet, you know, bread or what is it, bananas, rice, you know, whatever. Anyway,
Applesauce and toast. I can't
Yes,
believe I
thank you.
remembered that.
Yeah, if those things sound good, go for it. But again, I'm always going to return to advising you to listen to your body. And so don't be sitting there in your bed, all feeble and go like, am I supposed to starve a fever or feed a fever? Like, it doesn't matter. Are you hungry? Eat. If not, don't.
Exactly.
That's easier.
Yeah, because like her and I are totally different when we get sick. Like she has to go
I
lay
go in
down.
the
Like she
cave.
has to go to the bedroom
Uh-huh.
and just like she stays in there. Every now and then she'll come out for food and then she'll go right back down in there and she'll sleep a lot when she's sick. And then I'm the complete opposite. I just like to be in one space, like upstairs, and then
Watching TV.
watching TV or something like that instead of like sleeping all the time. I can't sleep all the time because if I sleep, then I won't be able to sleep at night, kind of thing. So,
But my thing is, if I'm sick, my body's like, let's sleep this thing off. So usually I'll go down, I'll do that for a day or two, and then I come back up pretty well done. I mean, obviously, barring certain illnesses, like my bout with COVID was a lot longer than that. But if it's just something small, but it seems from talking to other people, there seems to be two kinds of people. People who want to heal alone and need everything quiet. I like have spa music, I read silly books, and I sleep, and I wake up and I read, and I sleep and I read. And then you just stay up and watch TV and you're grumpy.
and I eat. Like when I don't feel good, that's how I can always tell when I'm starting to feel better is that I'll start being really hungry.
Yeah, I
And
think
then-
that's the thing for me too, in general. So we do have another question from Karen. Can we use chia or flax seeds, or do we have to wait until we lose our weight? And I would maybe even put a little thing in there to you, Stacy, because what comes to my mind is, well, if you're making cornbread with a tablespoon of flax instead of eggs versus like, I know on Dr. Goldner's protocol, don't you eat a quarter cup to a half a cup of flaxseed a day? So I'm just putting that there are two variations that I might know about.
Got it. Okay. So my reason that I usually discuss with people, the reason that they usually are consuming flax seeds or chia seeds is for the omega 3s. They're trying to like just double, triple, make sure that they're getting enough omega 3s. I respect it, not going to hurt you. However, it will hurt you, specifically your weight loss, if you're consuming too much of it. So the guidelines I give my patients are, have a tablespoon in your oatmeal or on your salad or whatever a day, but really not more than that. And I don't personally consume chia seeds. They're not my favorite, but I do ground flaxseed on my oatmeal every day. So that's fine. It's like 35 calories. It's not nothing, but it's low enough that it probably is not making a huge dent in your ability to lose weight. Also, ground flax seeds on their own don't taste good. So I worry far less about that than when people are like, ooh, I'm going to try to eat, walnuts every day. It's like, well, but walnuts are good. And even more so if they're like, I'm going to eat almond butter. I'm like, oh boy. It's just way too easy to abuse those things and overdo them. So I would just stick with a tablespoon a day during weight loss or none at all. You do not need them. You are getting enough omega-3 just eating the McDougall diet, but if you really would feel more secure doing so, feel free to do a tablespoon a day of one or the other.
Okay. And that kind of fits in. I tend to use flax eggs or put flax on stuff. I do use chia sometimes as a thickener, but like if I do, I made, like if I want to thicken an oat milk so that someone who drinks Oatly will drink my milk, I'll put like a half a teaspoon, sometimes a quarter of a teaspoon of ground chia seeds in there. And then it can help thicken it up. But it sounds like for what most people would be adding just normally or having some on their oatmeal or something like that. I will say there seems to be a really big message about vegans and whole food plant-based people and omega-3s right now. I'm seeing it constantly on Facebook ads, and I'm seeing constant ads for a specific supplement that I'm not even going to name, that I know you've seen it too. Everyone probably who is here who goes on Facebook has seen it. Do you think it's a little bit of like, ooh, let's talk about this to sell our product? Do you have any feelings about that?
I honestly, I'm just really lucky to be in the McDougall program world and in the McDougall Medical and Health Center. And so I'm surrounded by experts at all times. And I've been assured that it's nothing to worry about. And so I just do not worry about it. I am one of those lucky people that I can just suspend my worry. Jeff Novick does an entire talk during the 12-day program on fats. And he covers omega-3s and omega-6s and essential fatty acids and all the stuff, and gets real deep into the nitty-gritty. And it's a fantastic talk, and I would love for everybody to hear it. But in the end, he's like, and you get enough just eating this way. Spoiler alert, that's kind of the conclusion. And so I do not, so you may not know, if you are unfamiliar with Dr. McDougall, Dr. John McDougall, who's recently passed away, but on whom all of this was built and centered on his philosophy of a starch-centered diet. He did not believe in supplementation outside of a regular B12 supplement. He just feels like everything you need, you can get. We also do advise people, vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, and lots of us can get plenty of it because of where we live, and some people cannot because of where they live. And so occasionally people will be advised by their doctors to supplement with vitamin D. When patients come through the McDougall program, we get to advise them. Dr. Lim can tell them in their specific circumstances, according to their or in accordance with their medical history, whether or not they should be supplementing vitamin D. But B12 is the only supplement that we generally recommend for all people who eat this way.
And Beth is saying, and kind of asking as well, I'm assuming that if there were some revolutionary science-backed, well-researched discovery about our real need for X, Y, or Z, we would see a message about it in a McDougall communication. Am I right to assume that? That thought helps me ignore all the other noise.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely you would. And Beth is part of our community. She has gone through the 12-day program. And so we're always in conversation about these things in our various alumni groups and everything. And so you would find out really quickly, but that's the beauty of it. Very little has changed. As Dr. McDougall used to always say, the truth don't change, and that's really true. If you think about it, whatever was true 150, 200, 1,000, 2,000 years ago is still true today. Does that mean we've discovered all possible truth? No. But this is why these things don't really change. And unfortunately, lack of change does not sell. It just doesn't. You can only write the same book so many times before people start realizing it's the same book. And for a lot of people out there, even very well-meaning people out there, they're trying to sell. They're trying to stay relevant. They're trying to stay in front of their consumer's face. And so they need to do things like a deep dive into the benefits of kale versus spinach, or a deep dive into, soy oil and corn oil and all kinds of, there are endless things you can talk about, and there's endless supplements you can convince people that they need to take. But the truth is, you just don't. You don't need all that. And you're going to spend a lot of money. You could possibly hurt yourself over supplementing. Over supplementation is a major problem. We do know that's true. And so anyway, but yes, Beth, Yes, absolutely. If anything happens, any big change, you're going to definitely hear it. And Dr. Lim is paying very close attention, much like Dr. McDougall did. And so we're on it. Don't you worry.
I,
You leave the worrying to us.
I love you, Stacy, so much.
I love you.
And Apple was saying something that is how I think too. I always refer to my blood labs when I'm concerned about nutrient deficiencies. I like data, and we're going to go into someone who has a nutritional deficit in a second. But I mean, that's one of the things, like your primary care physician, or if you're in the program, you do blood work with Dr. Lim, they can see some of these things. So, I mean, like Cheryl and I are, well, Cheryl worse than me, but we're constantly low in D. Like we have,
level.
so we keep an eye on that because evidently our bodies are just like, eh. So we have to keep on top of it, right? Like
I just went to the doctor last week, and then she was like, your vitamin D's low again.
And she's taking her vitamin D as
But
she's
then what
supposed
happens
to.
is then it gets too high. And then I have to stop taking it for a little bit. And so I can't seem to figure out what the magic number is for me. So
And one thing just to kind of notice with that is, so like Cheryl may be different than you, and that you are fine and you don't need it, or that maybe your doctor has said, yeah, you need it, and then you work with them, because it's not like, well, Stacy took 500 XYZs of this, so I should take that much. And
Right.
I think sometimes that's what I worry about supplements, because especially if it's like a vegan supplement, where it has a whole bunch of different things, it's assuming we all are in the same place and needing exactly the same amount. And speaking, do you want to finish up?
Yeah, let me say one quick thing. So Cheryl, I want to remind you again, my dear, that you can reach out to Dr. Lim about this. So this is the beauty of people who have gone through the 12-day program. Dr. Lim is their doctor forever. And so if you have something like this going on, like your doctor has advised, your PCP has advised you to go on a vitamin D supplement, and you're having a hard time regulating your vitamin D, send an email to Dr. Lim. If you are a patient of ours and you've been through the program, and he'll be happy to help you. Now, I will say one thing that I think is very important to mention, and that is the standard ranges of vitamin D, as well as lots of other values, are based on on regular Americans. So regular Americans eating the standard American diet, most of the time they'll fall in this range of vitamin D. Right? And that's because they're eating a lot of foods that are fortified with vitamin D. And so the range was created based on what's normal for an American, but you're not eating the normal standard American diet. And so our values actually, to be completely healthy, are usually lower. They're not based on the standard American diet, if that makes sense. So there's that I'm going to predict now, Cheryl, that when you email Dr. Lim and you tell her what your vitamin D level is, and you tell him your vitamin D level, and you tell him what your doctor's suggesting, he's going to say, that number doesn't apply to you. Here's the range I want you in.
Gotcha. That makes good sense to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm always like just right under what they say is normal. Like I'm usually like just slightly under that. And then she's like, oh, what, you got to get you back up. I'd like you to be over here. So.
Right. But that's because you're not eating a bunch of vitamin D fortified processed food. You're eating.
Oh, that's interesting. I never think about that too, because there are a lot of vitamins added into certain. Like, I went to buy grits at I'm in North Carolina. Usually you can go out and buy grits. We have some mills, and usually I go find the NC grits, get my NC grits, and it was like, I don't even think they were Quaker. There were some weird grits, and it was like, GMO added all these vitamins. And I was like, those aren't my grits. You remember?
Yeah, I remember.
So it's like, they don't have grits there. But I mean, and again,
It was very
if it was the zombie apocalypse, I'd be eating those grits. I tell you that right now. But I knew I had some other choices at that point.
But my vitamin D has been rock bottom before, like really, really bad, and
it's affected her also.
But I know how that makes me feel. I know where the aches and pains come. I know that the front of my shins start hurting. I know that all these things. And so if I'm not feeling that, I feel like I'm probably okay.
Yeah. And we have a question. Again, now we're in vitamin territory. My ferritin is low, says Elsgummer, and I can't seem to tolerate iron supplements. What's the best way to help this? I've upped my legume intake. Should I use a protein powder? I'm trying not to. Thanks.
No. Yeah. Sorry to hear that. So I am not going to directly advise you. I do not want to medically advise you because you are not our patient and that is not my job. But I will say that in addition to beans and legumes, greens are great for iron. And when you pair iron-containing foods with vitamin C, it increases your absorption of the iron. So make sure that you always have like a squeeze of lemon on your greens, or even red peppers with your beans, things like that. That could potentially help.
Oh, that's great. It's been a long time since I've had an iron deficiency. I've struggled with that off and on previously, but I went on a big Indian extravaganza. So I ate lots of dal and lots of saag. I made it at home because it usually has dairy if you go out to the restaurant. But so I made what to me then was the best tasting greens I could make. But you can even, one of the things I've even gotten Cheryl doing, which is crazy because she wouldn't eat greens at all, is if we went to our little bowl place yesterday, we had an extravaganza. And so they have kale and Napa cabbage chopped up. So we get half of that and half of purple rice. So you can even, if you chop it up really small, like if it's a big piece of kale, it's not pleasant in your salad or your bowl. Unless you can saute it, and even then, but if you chop it up, that's how I got her into greens, is I would mince it like parsley, sprinkle it on everything, and that might be something too. I suspect Els is more tolerant of greens than Cheryl was.
I love greens.
Let me add one more quick thing. Dr. McDougall used to always tell people, hey, if you are eating whole plant foods that are high in iron, you're pairing it with the vitamin C and all of that, and your iron is still low, then you need to be looking for the source of the bleeding. So in women of childbearing age, of course, they have a monthly menstrual period, and so they lose iron that way. And that could be an issue. But if you are postmenopausal or or you're a man, we need to find out why from where you are possibly bleeding, because otherwise you really should not be having that issue.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting to know. Switching, Nora says, I've recently read about Mary's Mini diet on the McDougall website as a startup or a reboot to get back on track. I'm interested in hearing more about this. And I just want to put a little thing too. It's in Dr. McDougall's website and it's free. And if you look down in the show notes, I give you a link to the website and to the free Starch Solution program that's on the website as well.
Great. Thank you for doing that, Kathy. What more? Well, everything you read on the website is probably what I would open my mouth and say right now when you ask me more about Mary's Mini. Some people, and this is something that Dr. McDougall used to say, and I totally agree with, is I really actually would prefer you really get the standard McDougall diet down first. Okay. If you are eating the regular, as you guys say, the Starch Solution diet regularly, faithfully, consistently, and you want to take it a step further, go ahead and do a Mary's Mini. Could be fun. Let's see what happens. But often people go to Mary's Mini because they keep falling off the diet. and they kind of want to a little bit punish themselves or make it more hardcore, make it harder for themselves, because somehow that feels like it'll render better results for them. Very rarely does that happen, maybe temporarily, because ultimately at the end of the thing, you still have to do the thing I described first, which is just get into the swing of making this your day-to-day diet, just the regular Starch Solution diet. There's no need, you don't have to restrict. You don't have to go hardcore in order to see results for most of you. And I think that's, so often the people I talk to who are like, I'm going to do a Mary's Mini for 15 weeks or whatever. It's because they feel like if they could be that hardcore, maybe they'll get their booties in gear and, like finally do it. And I can tell you in my own personal experience and in my experience with hundreds of patients, more restriction is very rarely, if not never, the solution to your woes, to your dieting issues. The solution is a true lifestyle change and getting real comfortable and solid on just following the regular McDougall diet.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do think, too, sometimes we as Americans feel like if we're tougher, if we're harder, we're doing better. Like I forget what the thing is that's going around on, I think it's TikTok and Facebook. So it was like, is it 60 hard or 30 hard? Like there's like 30 whatever, and then there's like,
it's like 75.
Yeah, that's at 75 hard, and there's like 75 normal and 75 hard, and like basically you're pushing yourself beyond your limits. And I can see some possible good in some situations, but I think as a Mary, we're like, oh, apples are good for us. Let me eat all apples now. And so I see exactly what you're saying, and I think it is so easy to just go, oh, let's just do the Mary's Mini. And I know that we've done it when we've come back from vacation to try and reset. And it's not always easy. I think in some ways it's easier for me because, believe it or not, as much different kinds of food as I make, I can eat the same breakfast for 6 months. I change it like twice a year. I'm good. And Cheryl will crawl out of her skin if she has to do that.
Yeah. There are benefits to it. I'm not going to say that it's never helpful, because it is kind of nice at times to sort of be able to turn your brain off and just go on auto and just have a big pot of rice and a big pot of, or whatever, green beans or whatever you decide to do with your Mary's Mini, your starch and your veggies, and just not have to think about food. That is nice. And there are places that it helps. Like you said, getting back from a vacation, getting back on track when you've been way off track. But that's just not the majority of the people that I see talking about it. The majority of those people are like, they just can't stick with the regular program. And so they're sort of like getting firmer with themselves, thinking that that's going to be the thing. And it just rarely is.
That makes total sense. Karen wants to know, and I know the answer to this one, can I go through the program if I've lost all my weight?
Definitely. We always have people that don't need to lose any weight going through the program. Always. There's always a pretty good handful. Our program actually is very representative of America across the board. It's like we have about the same percentage of overweight and obese people in the program as you see out there walking around in the real world. And so certainly, yes, you can. We also always have at least a few people that need to gain weight. And for those of us who have had weight issues, overweight issues our whole lives, it's very hard for us to wrap our minds around it being difficult to gain weight, but it does happen. And so we are able to hold their hand and counsel them through that and help them gain the weight they're seeking to gain. So yes, it is not a weight loss program. It's a medically supervised intervention for chronic illnesses, and also just for teaching a lifestyle, a sustainable lifestyle that hopefully you will follow the rest of your life.
That's great. Dilla has a question. Is it true that an LDL of 76 And an HDL of 42 is okay, because with the lower LDL, you don't need a higher HDL. I know that's fancy cholesterol talk that's over my head.
Me too.
Yeah. So I want to go the right direction with this. I am not going to be able to advise you medically about what your cholesterol should be. However, those are normal cholesterol numbers, and people who have low total cholesterol are often advised, oh, you have low cholesterol and your LDL is nice and low, but your HDL has gotten low too. Folks, that just happens when your cholesterol drops. Your HDL gets lower along with your LDL, your total cholesterol gets lower. That is normal, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. So anytime you are cautioned about HDL getting too low, it's based on old science where they noticed a correlation between low HDL and worse cardiac outcomes. So they decided that, oh, that must mean that low HDL is correlated to cardiac issues, heart disease and all of that. And so, it's HDL is protective against cardiac issues and cardiac events. But what they came to find out is that and this is some science, you guys, so I'm only going to be able to go so far with this, but what they came to find out is that HDL is elevated in response to high LDL. So it's a self-protective mechanism that your body does. It increases the HDL, which is protective, but it's increasing it because your LDL is bad and elevated and terrible. So that's how that happens. And so think about it. If your LDL is nice and low and HDL is your body's response to bad cholesterol, the raising of the HDLs, it makes sense that your HDL will be lower if your total cholesterol and your LDL are nice and low. So you do not need to worry about it.
Awesome. And Els was just following up with us about the iron, saying she had a FIT test, which I looked up, which is, you know what it is. Okay.
Yes.
Of course you do.
Well, we can tell the audience, though.
Okay.
It's screening for colon cancer.
Yeah, it's here. It says fecal immunochemical test. So I learned something new today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the FIT test is actually preferable over Cologuard. You may have heard of Cologuard, which is the more widely, or has been up until now, the more widely used one. It's, the poop smear test, and you send it in and they test it for blood. And if there's a presence of blood in your feces, then that indicates that you need to follow up with possibly going and getting a colonoscopy. But it's an alternative. It's a certainly far less invasive alternative to having a colonoscopy. Colonoscopies, though, as you can imagine, they're there in your colon, so they get a real good up close view. And so you only have to have a colonoscopy as long as it's clear, like every 10 years, depending on your risk level. Cologuard, I believe, was every 3 years, as long as it's negative. I could be wrong. The FIT test is yearly, but the FIT test has fewer false positives.
Okay.
The problem with false positives is every time you get a positive result, the next step is going and getting a colonoscopy. And then you go through the invasiveness of colonoscopy and the expense and all that and the risks and all that stuff. And so you don't want there to be a bunch of false positives. And that's why we do recommend the FIT test out of the two.
And that's great. If you heard us giggle, which you may have, it's because Cheryl put too much poop in her Cologuard test. You said smear, and we went hee, because I was like, So she had to do it again because they only send you enough stuff to preserve so much stuff that you put in. And so this is Cheryl's giant medical humiliation. But she loves to tell the story.
That's exactly what they called me. They called me, and I'm all freaking out because they called me and left a message and asked me to call them back. And I was like, oh my God, something's bad wrong. And so I call the guy, and he's like, doesn't really know what to say, and he's trying to explain it to me in a way that's like, trying to be very respectful and everything. And finally I just said, so like, are you saying I sent too much? And he was like, well, yeah. Because they weigh the box, and the box weighed way too much. And so,
No, it's not. They weigh the box.
and I said,
Cheryl,
I sent too much.
you sent the whole thing, didn't you?
Well, and then she came to, she runs in the rooftop. She's like, oh my God. So she loves a good story. So, but I just wanted to make sure if anyone heard us giggle, it wasn't because you said like colonoscopy or something like, whenever we hear that word, we're like, oh, that's all we can think is Cheryl sent in too much poop to the testing place.
And the poor guy trying to explain it to me, and he was just like, and then finally I was like, you mean I just sent too much? And he was like, well, yes. And he said, you don't have to send that much.
So embarrassing.
But that's the thing, though. It's not face to face. You can live through it. So,
Yeah.
But also, I consider this a public service announcement.
Yes.
Maybe read through the instructions.
Read the instructions clearly before
Yes.
you just assume what the plastic collector is for.
All right. So now,
I love it. Oh my gosh.
so TS just has noticed, and actually I have too, just noticed on some food items, it will state that bioengineered foods or grains are in the product. Is that meaning GMO foods? And I've noticed they're changing their wording again.
Yes. Yes, I believe that does refer to GMOs.
That's my guess too. Mm-hmm. Apple also wanted to share, I lost 130 pounds on the regular old starch solution. Worked for me. Yay. It's a solid way of eating.
It is very solid.
Excellent. Isn't that encouraging, you guys? I know you can't answer me, but
yes, you can in the comments.
Let me just say this. Apple, to you and everybody else, sometimes when you lose all that weight, you can feel a little sheepish about sharing your, because it's like, you don't want to feel like you're like, everybody look at me, I'm amazing, look what I did. But for people who are desperate to lose weight and are fed up and like don't know where to turn, for you to make a comment like that and say, I did it. I just followed the regular McDougall starch solution diet and I lost 150 pounds. That is so encouraging. It infuses hope and encouragement that we all really could use in this journey. So thank you so much for sharing that, and let it be an encouragement to all of us to freely share our stories and our successes with this way of eating.
Oh, I love that. And Apple is just such an awesome member of the community too. She's so helpful. SFOS said I did the 12-day McDougall program and feel it was so worth the cost. And that's one of the things that we've tried to talk about before. It's not just the 12 days, because it is an expensive program, but you are also getting a year's worth of support and some other things too. So we make sure to know that. Mm-hmm. James Reeder wants to know, is it safe to eat potatoes at most meals versus sweet potatoes? I prefer the texture of a white potato, but wonder if I'm missing out on nutrients by not eating sweet potatoes.
No, you go for it. If a white potato is what you prefer, go ahead and have that. Yes, of course, sweet potatoes are fantastic and they're wonderful, but no, as long as you're eating your potatoes and maybe every once in a while throwing in some fruits and veggies, you should be perfectly fine.
Awesome. I was picking up the kitty. So that's why there's the delay.
I'm anticipating my short answer.
I know. I'm like, I got time. Fergus, do you not want to? You want to be over here? Okay. This is why counter sanitizers exist, so he can have a happy little time. He wanted to say hey to everybody.
He loves to be on camera, actually.
He does. All right. So Sherry Ann says, does Stacy have any recommendations for feeling anxious? It's overwhelming to me recently. I strictly follow Dr. McDougall's eating plan.
I'm so sorry. I do know how hard anxiety can be and how debilitating it can be. Um, Eating this way will help because it does help when you know that you're nourishing your body and that you feel your best. It helps. Helps with the anxiety. But I'll just say, there's all kinds of different directions you can go to get help with it. I'm a big fan of cognitive behavioral therapy. And yes, you can go find a therapist that will do that with you, but you can actually also do it on your own. Am I saying everybody should do it on their own? No. I'm not a therapist. I am not a psychiatrist or any other kind of thing in that world. But I will say there are different ways to do it. And I don't know if therapy is in your budget or not, but there are some fantastic tools, even available on Amazon, little workbooks that you can do, cognitive behavioral therapy with yourself, with some journaling and thought work and things like that. Even just talking with friends or family members that you trust and love about what the specific struggles are. What is it that's making you anxious? But yeah, there's not, I mean, I can't say that there's a particular way to change your diet or anything that would help. I will say you may be really surprised if you do take in caffeine in any form, that could be a contributing factor. People tell me all the time, they're like, well, but I've drank coffee my whole life. Why would it all of a sudden be causing issues? Because your body changes as it ages. I can tell you right now, coffee is not the fun little parade walk in the park that it used to be for me. I don't drink it anymore because it doesn't make me feel good. It used to make me feel amazing and unstoppable. And that is just not the case now in my 40s. And that's okay. I go where my body tells me to go, And so if you are consuming caffeine at all, you may consider scaling back on that and seeing if that could be a contributing factor.
Yeah, I know one of the things that Kathy and I both do is we'll go for a walk sometimes if we're feeling anxious, and just the act of that movement, kind of being outside, sometimes can reset us if we're having an especially anxious day.
Especially if it has to do with work and we're removing ourselves from that situation. And I was going to mention that too, or even like look at some restorative yoga, which is kind of like passive stretching. So you can lay there, which if you're anxious, it can be really hard. So maybe you can do 2 minutes or 30 seconds of it one day. So, because I've had some anxiety, and over the pandemic, I couldn't do caffeine at all. I gotten off caffeine, sugar, anything that's a stimulant can be problematic. I found when I'm having big anxiety, so I try to, and for me, when I get it, I start feeling kind of claustrophobic. So getting outside is helpful for me. It might not be helpful for you. Maybe being outside makes you more anxious. So I love what Stacy was saying about there's a lot of ways. Also having a cat helps. So this is like Fergus can feel, like if I start feeling too anxious, Fergus puts his little body on me and he's like, okay, I'll help you. So, but talking to friends and things like that, and I'm so sorry because anxiety is just not fun. It's not fun at all. And just remember that all the stories your brain tells itself may not be true.
Yes.
That's what happens when I'm anxious. Immediately, I'm a bad person. So hopefully you're not feeling that way. But you know what I mean? Just remember and try and check in with friends or family just to get that reality check of what's going on. Alrighty.
I am so glad I am not alone.
Yeah, okay, so other people, TS did the same as Cheryl and sent extra poop in for the cold guard. We're transitioning back to fight, so everybody's laughing. Beth said, I have no idea how you were going to top that story. Cheryl will find some
Well,
way.
I don't know. It's almost time for Stacy's story time. So.
Okay, yeah, Stacy will have a better story. Maybe not as an embarrassing one, though. Let's see, do we have, and Diana's saying, that's incredible, Apple. It gives me encouragement to go on. So really kind of focuses with that. So, because it's just Stacy, we get story time. Like, I love story time.
Yes. Well, I told you guys ahead of time that I had a story because I have not shown up with a story the last few times I've been here, and I'm so sorry. But I thought of one this week because I was, my kids, so many of you know I have four boys. It's wild. It's so fun. But it's busy and wild all the time. We're always playing and doing all kinds of stuff. So the other day I was in the front yard and my kids were like doing various things. And one of my kids was jumping on his bike and he was going to go look for something. I don't know. Anyway, so he gets on his bike and he just zooms right off. This is my 10-year-old. And as I'm watching him go down the road, I just suddenly remembered, oh man, like, whoa, bike riding was a whole thing with him. And I totally forgot about it. So backing up, you know, when you have multiple kids, one of the things that is the most surprising is how different they can be, even though you're raising them in the same home, exactly the same way. They're just different people. And obviously, I should have known that on some level, but it has continued to surprise me time and time again how different my four individual human beings are that live here. And so, our very first son, when he was born and started, you know, developing and doing all the milestones, everything was happening very late, later than normal, you know. And what we came to find out was it was because he was a very cautious person. So, you know, he didn't learn to crawl early on, you know. I mean, he learned to crawl, but it was like way later, you know, than most of my friends' kids. And walking and everything, that climbing, all of that stuff. And now looking back, I'm like, thank goodness, because he was so much easier to handle. He was such a pleasant little baby and he wasn't climbing the walls and like, you know, risking his life and stuff because he was a very cautious child. And it turns out, I mean, he's almost 15 now, and it turns out that is just who he is at his core. He's just more cautious, which I am so grateful for with my eldest son. But my second son came along and knocked that whole, you know, pile of bricks over because he was walking at 9 months old. And if you've never seen a 9-month-old walk, it is bizarre. It's literally like, and he was small for his age too. So it was like a baby walking. And we would get stopped in the grocery store all the time and at restaurants and stuff. And they're like, how old is that baby? You know, and I'd be like, he's 9 months old, but he's totally walking. And he did everything super duper fast. And then our third son, more similar to the first. So a little bit slower to warm up to things. But we found out with him, it's not because he's cautious, it's because he's easily frustrated, which is interesting because that is a lot like me. And so he doesn't have a lot of patience for failure. And so coming back to the point of the story, so when they were learning to ride bikes, they all very much learned to ride a bike very much in line with their personality. My cautious son, he was later to it because he was very cautious and he didn't want to fall. And so when he finally learned to ride a bike, you guys, I'm not even kidding, he never has fallen, not one time. Why? Wow. Because he, in his physical body and the way his little mind works, he didn't even start riding a bike until he knew he wouldn't fall. You see? Whereas my second son started riding a bike at like 2 years old and fell like a billion times, you know, and that was part of his learning journey. And then our third son, super late to learning to ride a bike. And the reason was because the first time he fell, he kicked it across the yard and said, I don't need this. Goodbye. And then he didn't try again for like 2 years. So the moral of my story is this. The other day, that child who is so easily frustrated and kicked his bike across the yard just got on his bike at 10 years old and just went right on down the road without thinking two thoughts about it. And I thought to myself, wow, look at that. It worked out in the end and everybody rides a bike and, you know, it's fine. But I started thinking, what if I said to him right now, right as he was getting on his bike to leave, what if I said, you were terrible at learning how to ride this bike. You were awful. And do you know how bad you were at it? Like, how disempowering would that be for him? And he'd be like, how rude, like, that's awful. Well, what if he, after he kicked the bike across the yard, decided never, ever, ever to get on the bike again? Or what if he got on the bike, but he fell, or he didn't do it perfectly, and said, well, I don't know how to ride a bike, so forget it, you know? There's so many ways that story could have gone, and in the end, he would have never ridden the bike. But he did, because in his time and in his way, he decided to get back on and try again. So what I want to communicate here is that when we fail in other areas, or when other people fail, we don't get in their face and go, you're terrible at this. Just don't even bother. Don't even try again. They may be saying that to themselves, and our job as their loved one is to convince them otherwise, right? So you better believe that when he started, when he failed and kicked his bike across the yard, I was over there going, you can do this. Please don't let your frustration get in the way. You can do this. Like, try again. And he's like, no, I'm not trying again. Okay, fine. Like, in the end, he does have to be the one to decide to do it, and he has to do it himself. I can't do it for him. We know that. But let me be a voice of encouragement and hope and belief and faith in him. Had he ever learned to ride a bike before? No, he hadn't. So why did I believe that he could? Why did I tell him he could? Well, because I know people, and I had other kids, and I saw that they, despite their personalities and the ways that they were, they learned anyway. And so, all this to say, how often do we, in this weight loss journey, fall down and start saying things to ourselves, start doing some stinking thinking, and say to ourselves things like, I'll never get it right. I'll never be able to do this. I've tried a million times and have failed. I am the worst. I'm lazy. I'm whatever. And we just kick ourselves when we're down. And that kind of disbelief that we can accomplish it is scarring, and it is very disempowering. And I am here to tell you that I believe that most people who don't ultimately lose the weight that they want to lose, it's not for lack of tools, it's not for lack of knowledge, it's because they never choose to believe in themselves. So I was talking with a patient the other day, and she's like, I've done this, I've dieted a million times. I've never been able to lose the weight. And this voice is starting to creep up that says, you've always done this and you're never going to make it. And she's like, I have a really hard time knowing how to handle that voice, because it's not wrong. I haven't ever done it. I've never gotten it right. I've never been able to lose the weight. And so I said to her, hey, listen, hun, you borrow my faith in you until you have it for yourself. Because I have worked with hundreds of people, many people who haven't succeeded in the way they want to, and many that have. And I believe that belief in yourself is half the battle. You can do it. You can. Do not tell yourself that you can't, because you never have. Because up until you learn to ride a bike, you've never done it. But you keep trying, and you keep showing up, believing somehow that it will work. It'll all get into place, and you'll be able to ride that bike one day. So if there are any of you guys out there that are here because this is your last ditch effort, like, I've tried everything, I've done the grapefruit diet, all the things, and somebody told me about this, and I'm going to give it one more go, but I'm frustrated and I don't have a lot of faith in myself. Please borrow from our faith in you and our testimony that anyone can do it. It's not the smartest people. It's not the most talented people. It's not the prettiest people. It's not the most educated people. It's not, all of those things. those aren't the people who are successful. The people who are successful are the ones who choose to believe they can do it and who never stop showing up and never stop getting up when they fall. Story time.
Yay, story time's the best.
Was that
It was excellent.
It was excellent.
good?
And so I'm getting some comments I can't put up on the screen. I'm not sure why things aren't doing right. But Beth F. says it's amazing the things we can say to ourselves and not even be aware of what we are saying. The nonstop conversations in our heads are so important. And I'm always personally working on that because I'm way meaner to me than I am anybody else.
She is so hard on
Definitely.
herself, and it's just, sometimes I have to just do like I did the other day and kidnap her and make her step away from things.
It was fun. I had a good time. But yeah, sometimes I get locked into things. And a lot of it's about, I love the way you talked about the learning styles and things like that. So it just makes things have so much more sense. Okay, let me see if now I'm getting lots of comments over here. Still none I can share up on the screen. So SFOS says this is so powerful. Dawn says everyone has to find his or her own way. There's no right or wrong, just do. And Apple says, I love the story. How we do something does not have to conform to how someone else does it. And I think that's really awesome. Yeah, I think that's all of our comments and questions that I see. Sorry if I missed anyone between some of it not coming up like usual. That's why I've been keeping my computer to the side lately, is every once in a while something weird will happen. But Stacy, as always, it was just so awesome to have you on.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Can I add one more thing to story time? Sorry, I just thought of something else.
Absolutely.
that I
You've got
think is
some
powerful.
time,
Okay.
actually.
Go for it.
Okay.
Okay, so I do want to say one more little admonishment to you guys, and this is for anybody who's ever done the thing where you have an intention about what you're going to eat today, and then somebody shows up with a cupcake or whatever, and you go off your plan. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, shoot, I ruined it. The day is destroyed. I might as well eat everything, because it's, it's already shot. I might as well eat everything in sight, right? That is my natural diet mentality that I carried for many, 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 many years. But in this analogy that we're talking about riding the bike, it's literally the same thing as if, like, you fall off you're trying to learn how to ride the bike, you fall off and you think, well, this bike is the worst. And so you just go ahead and slash all the tires and, like, pull the seat off and throw it across the yard, and that's it. It's like, no, my goodness, no. Like, that, first of all, you're doing more harm, right? You're taking in a bunch of more excess calories that eventually, in the calculation of calories in, calories out, they do count. Darn it. And so you're putting yourself in a worse position than if you had just picked the bike back up and just gotten right back on. That's the beauty of this way of eating, is you can do exactly that. You just get right back on. You haven't ever blown all your points or blown all your calories to the point that you need to stop eating or go ahead and eat a whole cake. It's like, no. I have told you guys this before, and I'll repeat it as many times as it takes. The people I see do the best are the ones who have the least amount of recovery time. Okay? So they're the ones who, when they stumble and when they fall, first of all, they don't not stumble and fall. Everybody stumbles and falls. Okay? It's all about your recovery. How quickly can you get yourself right back up and start again, right back on track? And make it a little competition with yourself. If you think to yourself, okay, last week when Sally showed up with the donuts and I ate 3 of them and I didn't mean to, I ate really poorly the whole rest of the day, and that was bad. That was bad recovery. So challenge yourself. Next time I mess up, I have to recover in half the time that I recovered from the Sally donut incident. right? So instead of it being a 4 to 6 hour incident, it was only 2 hours, and I only ate, a grilled cheese sandwich, and then I got back on track or whatever. So make that your goal, is getting up as fast as you possibly can and not doing more damage when you fall down, because that's not going to help. It's only going to make you feel worse.
Yeah.
And that's so true. That's so
much
true.
sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that you mention everybody makes mistakes. Nothing's going to be perfect, because I think that we do put those kinds of, that's what causes my anxiety. Let's just be clear about that, is that I put on these unrealistic expectations and then I don't meet them, or, my goals are always constantly moving forward. I've met this one, so now I make a new one. Now I'm looking at it this way, but it used to be I just never actually meet it. Now I'm like, no, I met goal 1, now I'm going to make goal 2. Goal 2, goal 3, and you can't do that in everything. And I think that's one of the things that happens with this thought of clean eating, which is not necessarily starch solution. Like, clean eating, to me, while it can encompass a lot of these really healthy things, sometimes it is like this aspirational eating, of where I only eat organic watermelons that, happy possums sleep on at night, or something. It always seems like there's something added on, like you were saying earlier in this conversation, because it can't just be organic food now, because it can't be this kind of food, because this kind of food is not okay now, and this kind of food. And, whereas I think, and I've said this all along, is one of the reasons I picked the 12-day program with Dr. McDougall, is the starch solution seemed like the easiest and most maintainable of everything, without keeping, I don't want to do what Katya was doing and keep track of macros. I don't want to do Weight Watchers. And I make new food every day. Do you know how long it would take me to put in calories for everything I eat? Right? A normal eater, that's not that big a deal. Or someone who's eating salads. But but the McDougall program is, at least half of your plate or more with starch, and the rest with vegetables. And you can have some sauce. You can have, unless you have like some sort of health issue that prevents it, you can have a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar to make things palatable. And that just sounds easy.
And fruit too. You said vegetables, which I think you meant fruits and vegetables. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knows fruit is a part of it.
Yes. And because that's true, that's something that gets bantied about also, is that it does include fruit and vegetables. And so I just think it's really great. And thank you for always making story time so easily accessible, and help us train our brains to not just, I'm going to do this and only this.
Right. Yes, my pleasure. So fun being with you guys again. I love this. It's one of my favorite times in the month, is to come visit with you ladies.
Yay. Me too. Yay. And you guys just have the very best day, and treat yourself as well as you're able to today, and maybe try to do something special, if that's like, maybe make a little extra rice tonight so you have rice for tomorrow, or cook up a couple of extra potatoes, take a little stroll, pet your cat or dog, or someone else's cat or dog. That all, Cheryl, if I see you on vacation and you have an animal, chances are I'm coming straight for you, right? Because just give yourself something that feels good and yummy, and nice and is healthy. All right, with that, I'm going to let you guys go, and we will see you very soon. Okay.
Oh, now it is. It says on the air.